Good afternoon and welcome to BizTech's Asian Midday Market Watch. Our guest today is Vishnu Varathan, Head of Economics and Strategy at Mizuho Bank, coming out of Singapore. Vishnu, as always, great to have you on this Monday.
Always a pleasure to be here, Brian. Thanks for having me.
Now, we're going to start with taking a look at the crypto markets, which have seen quite a bit of movement. We've got Bitcoin, which is at 65,205. It's up 4.84%. Ethereum is at 4,717. It is up 3.71%. But crucially, Bitcoin has now passed the 1.23 trillion market cap number, and Ethereum is at just over 558 billion in terms of market cap. So it's just incredible numbers there. If we look across at how regional markets are performing right now, we see that the Nikkei is at 29,526.85. It's down 0.29%. The Shanghai Composite is at 3,495.04. It is up 0.1%. The Hang Seng is at 24,728.63. It's down 0.57%. The ASX 200 is also down. It's down 0.13% at 7,447. The Kospi is down 0.46% at 2,954.25. Closer to home, we've got Bursa Malaysia, which is at 1,533.6. It's up 0.12%. Rounding up the numbers, we've got the Straits Times Index, which is at 3,256.97. It is up 0.45%. Vishnu, your thoughts on the mixed performance of markets across the region today?
Sure. Well, Brian, I think on Friday we did see the US markets ending on a...
Sorry, Vishnu, we've just lost you there.
Well, part of it could be that we derived good numbers from US jobs. That was certainly helping with things. And we also had, over the weekend, good China trade data that came out. Nevertheless, I think there has been a little bit of a setback because markets are now wondering whether they are in the right place or not. For one, we had very volatile and violent moves in the bond market. So bond markets that were betting that the Fed and the other central banks were going to hike rates were surprised by the Bank of England, which did not. And the chief economist, Pill, came out to say it might be a mistake and it will be misguided to tighten. So I think that raises two things. One is, apart from the dislocation in the bond market that may have triggered some sell-off elsewhere, the other question is, does he know something that most of us are not looking at? Could there be a downside coming or perhaps a policy mistake coming? So we always are caught between excessive exuberance or just worry over many things. And I think this week markets are starting off on a slightly more cautious note. The dollar is a bit firmer. And I think they haven't lost sight of the fact that even if China's trade data came out good, you still have that energy crunch and that kind of backup of activity in the economy with more COVID numbers. And that has all of us wondering what the end of the year and going into early next year holds in terms of China's part in keeping the machinery running in Asia and even worldwide.
Yeah, so the numbers are good, but also if you look at the energy issues, which is obviously one of the clouds that are basically worrying investors. China imported double the amount of coal that it did last year, and also you have a situation where oil prices are still trending upwards. We've got the benchmark Brent crude futures up 0.92% to 83.50 a barrel. US crude futures are also up 1.05% to 82.12 per barrel. What are your thoughts on oil prices in the near term?
Well, I think China's imports of coal, as you rightly point out, is something that we ought to watch. But there's good and bad news in that. The bad news may be that if China is demanding so much, they're going to drive energy prices higher, coal prices higher, which means the rest of the region and so countries like India looking to import more coal may have some trouble. This is going to feed with inflation and things like that. But also it's good news insofar that China is actively trying to resolve its energy crunch and hence its supply chain crunch. And so for those reasons, we can also take some consolation, but you point us to the right direction, which is oil prices remaining elevated point to two things. One is economic inconvenience of high cost in a fragile recovery. The other is the geopolitical tensions building, because we don't lose sight of the fact that the US Energy Secretary is pressuring OPEC Plus to restore output more press. OPEC very bumpy path.
Sorry,
We may have a very bumpy path toward stable oil prices, which also spells a bumpy path for further economic recovery, at least in the first half of next year.
and how is that going to impact Asia? Because obviously, for countries like India, for example, it's a net importer of oil. Then on the other hand, we have countries like Malaysia who have benefited from this rise in oil prices.
Yeah, and I like that you summed that up so perfectly. You're looking at the two polar extremes in Asia, and which means it's going to differentiate very emphatically and acutely in Asia. You will have countries like India, to a lesser extent Philippines, feeling some of that pinch, and that may be reflected in the currency prices. Not necessarily in equities, because that's is a very selective process. But yet for Malaysia, it's very good news, because it means the fiscal pressures start to ease. And also it means that the economic recovery can be further boosted so long as politics is stable. So these are the things that come through. But for Asia, really, the big takeaway is there will be headwinds collectively in the recovery, because a lot of that would be eaten into by high energy prices. And that's something that's not only through the cost channels, but also global demand channels, because typically global demand tends to weaken a little bit when energy prices are high for prolonged periods of time.
Now, Vishnu, looking ahead with the start of the week, what are the key data points and events we need to look out for that will move markets?
I'm going to sound really boring here, but we need to look at US CPI. So US inflation, it's going to be a source for markets to think about what the Fed might do, and indirectly that's going to give rise to bond market volatility, potential for US Treasury yields to be very volatile, and that usually has a very large trickle-on effect on equities and FX. So that's one reason why a mundane pedestrian data point ought to be watched, because markets are expecting it'll go to fresh highs. Beyond the 13-year highs, it could go to 6%, both at the headline and the core. So it's really something for markets to think about. On the other side, the flip side, which is a beautiful week this week, they want to look at US consumer confidence. The University of Michigan confidence has been weak since August and hasn't really had a convincing confidence being undermined somewhat. That may spell a little bit of a risk-off mood. So that's what we want to watch in the US markets. Energy, you rightly and all of that. And finally, I think in Asia, we're watching Bank of Thailand. Malaysia's GDP end of the week is certainly worth watching to see what the Q3 impact was. And Philippines will release Q3 GDP as well tomorrow. So these are some of the bigger data points we're watching. I just want to conclude by saying that, look, we are also watching India's inflation and how these higher coal energy prices are impacting at the end of the week.
Now, Vishnu, as always, thank you very much for your insights and great to have you on the show.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me, Brian.
Now, we've been speaking to Vishnu Varathan, Head of Economics and Strategy from Mizuho Bank, speaking to us out of Singapore on BizTech's Asian Midday Market Watch. I'm Brian Fernandez. Please check out our various social media platforms for this video and podcast, as well as our website, www.biztech.asia. Please like and subscribe to our various social media platforms. Thank you very much for tuning in.